Happy Friday, guys, and happy Halloween! In this video, we're going to talk about Riot. They recently reported earnings, and it's dropping a lot today. Well, compared to other stocks, it's definitely dropping quite a bit, down about 8% as of this upload. I'm going to talk about why that may be. Could be a plethora of things, but we'll try to check out why the reasoning for this may be. Of course, the Bitcoin miners in general are kind of mixed. We've got some in the green a little bit, some in the red. We'll look at WGMI's heat map here in a second and look at the Bitcoin miners in general, but first let's go over some interesting news. Historic news even. We have news that Bitcoin and stable coins are going to be integrated into the Venezuelan banking system, and Conexus, which is a payment processing company, is in the early development stages of a system to integrate stablecoins and Bitcoin into Venezuela's banking network. Rodolfo Gaspari, the president of Conexus, said that current stablecoin adoption as a hedge against devaluation is driving this initiative. Now, this isn't just some random company. Conexus is a company that manages a system that drives 40% of the electronic transfers made in Venezuela, and they're now in the early stages of research and development for this platform, bringing stablecoins and Bitcoin to banks. Once completed, this system will allow banks in Venezuela to offer custody and transfer for these assets, as well as fiat currency exchange services. And as said by Gaspari, we're working on a blockchain project because currencies fluctuate so much, and these days people in Venezuela are using stablecoins for hedging. He believes that this would change the current vision of crypto, at least in Venezuela. Given that holders would be protected by banking regulations, this provides a great deal of security because it regulates the circulation of Bitcoin and USDT with transparency and appropriate regulation. Holders of these assets are truly protected. Now, while there's no definitive launch yet, analysts believe that it might be implemented as soon as the end of this year, December. Gaspari believes it will mark a turning point in the history of the Venezuelan banking system. And this is sort of a big deal because Venezuela could be the first mover. This could mark one of the first developments of this kind in the country and in the world. Venezuela is already developing it, while other nations are still studying similar implementations. This begins the bandwagon. This begins the monkey see, monkey do. One country does this. If it proves successful, we will see others follow suit. Before we look at Riot, I wanted to take a quick look at Bitcoin. Now, we're on the weekly here, and I've mentioned this many times, so sorry for those of you that have heard it in previous videos, but I've been consistently saying watch out for this on the 50 MA on the weekly. We get a double bounce here. I'll delete this just so you can see. Double bounce, we get a close test and then a retest, a massive bounce. This was a huge move, something like 40-50%. Just this initial move here, we're not talking about that, but just this initial move was like an almost 50% move. Back here we got a double bounce as well. Regained $10,000 worth of Bitcoin, regained 10,000, came back down and retested. This was similar. We were at 76, ran up to 89, retested. Right here we came down to 104, came back up to 116. It looks like we're coming down to retest it, possibly. This could be a potential area of support where the bodies stop. Of course, we have the wicks that wick down, but keep an eye on if we break this roughly 107.5-ish area. If we break that, I think there's a good possibility we test this 100 and roughly 2, the 50 MA on the weekly. If we get a retest, it'll be important to see a bounce because, as I've said in previous videos, last cycle this marked the end. Once you break that 50 MA on the test, it becomes a resistance. You're looking at crypto winter, you're looking at party over. And funny enough, this isn't the only cycle where this has been true. This is actually an indicator that has played out a few cycles. Here's back in the 2017 peak. We peaked out in 2017 in December, early December. Okay, we'll look at the next cycle peak in 2021 when that was. But here in December in 2017, we peaked, we started dropping, we used the 50 MA. We retested it, but we failed. We came back up, found it as resistance. That was it. We never saw a new all-time high until the next cycle, until the 2020 halving. Now in 2021, where did we top out? We topped out basically in mid-November. So 2 cycles ago, we topped out in December. Last cycle, we topped out in November, mid-November. And both times, you can tell, both times we utilized the 50 MA on the weekly. Guys, this is a crucial level to watch, and the market has utilized it in 2 past cycles. And while in the 2013 peak, it didn't necessarily find it as a resistance until much later, until most of the drop was already accounted for. You did see a reaction on the break. You saw a hard sell-off once we weren't able to hold. You saw that hold here and a knee-jerk reaction on that hold, a nice run, basically almost double from roughly 400. Imagine, guys, $400 Bitcoin. And imagine in a couple of decades now, a multi-million-dollar Bitcoin. It is possible. I think it is Guaranteed. I can't guarantee anything, but I think, you know, if I had to guarantee anything, if I had to bet, if I was a betting man, I would bet that Bitcoin will reach the millions over multiple decades. Think about the people back here when Bitcoin was 400. They would have never in their wildest dreams imagined a 100K Bitcoin. Here we are. Things can change over time. That's why, in my opinion, it's so important to just accumulate Bitcoin, because in many cases we're never gonna get these crazy low prices. Some prices are never gonna be seen again, such as a 15K Bitcoin. In my opinion, we're never gonna see that again. Those of us that bought at that time need to hold on for dear life to that 15K Bitcoin, because we're never gonna see that price again. You're gonna get so many multiples from a 15K Bitcoin versus wherever our next crypto winter low takes us. Is it 80K? Is it 70K? Is it a little lower than that? You're never going to get more multiples than being able to accumulate during the previous cycle winter lows. So you always want to hold on to that, you know, cheap Bitcoin that you bought. You'll get insane multiples out of it. The lower Bitcoin's price, the better. If you believe in it, you want low, cheap Bitcoin. All right, now I'm getting a little carried away and we have a lot to look at. Also, one thing I wanted to mention before I move on to Riot, we did hold here at the 50 on the RSI. We got a bounce. Typically, that is a good sign while you're in a bull market. If you get a pullback, a test of the 50 and a bounce, we are coming up to it again. If we break that 50, maybe we get a reaction. Maybe it's around the same time we test this 50 MA. If we don't hold this roughly 107,500, maybe we see that RSI break down, that test of the 50 MA, and history repeats like it has 2 times previously this cycle, where we bounce at that 50 MA on the weekly after that second test. Maybe we're due for that second test before we can finish this cycle and see a rally in November, maybe early December. Who really knows in the end? Most cycles end around December. The 2017 peak was December. Of course, the 2021 peak was mid-November. And the 2013 peak was technically December, like very early December, but still December. So when do you think we peak out at? Did we already peak? Did we see an early top this cycle because we saw all-time highs being broken early, if you guys remember that? Or are we gonna finish out similarly to past cycles where we see a, you know, top around November, December? Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Maybe we don't, maybe we drop more and we see somehow a new all-time high in 2026. I kind of find that unlikely, but hey, it's Bitcoin, it's crypto. So far, with the cycle, so far, so good. I continue to believe in the cycle until proven otherwise. So I do think we're going to top out sometime in either November or in like early mid-December, especially if we get that bounce on the 50 MA on the weekly. I do think if we get that second bounce, I do think we're coming for those all-time highs. On the break of that, the sky's the limit, so to speak. All right, now I want it. What the hell, man? Come on, dog. Come on, dog. Come on, dog. All right, now I wanted to talk about Riot. They reported earnings. They reported a surprise profit. Why is it the most read Bitcoin miner of the group? Of course, you know, Bitcoin miners in general today are probably doing more worse than they are good, than they are doing good. You know, we do see Canaan up 8.5%, which is fantastic. Someone was talking about Canaan. Hopefully he is enjoying this run. I don't really watch Canaan, but I know there are a couple people that mention it in my comments. But, you know, in general, we're looking at a relatively red day, you know, with some of the Bitcoin miners down 5-6%, Riot down 8.5% almost, not looking too great. Iron up, you know, 2.5%, Wolf up 0.5%, Core Scientific up 1.5%. So, you know, I'd say the ones that are red are relatively red. The ones that are green are like barely green. Maybe we see things flip red to end the day. But what's going on with Riot? Why is it down despite being a profitable quarter? Despite pulling in money, not burning cash? Now, I'm not going to go over it all, but I'll leave the investor relations site for Riot from their investor relations site. I'll leave it down below so you guys can read into the nitty-gritty, to the details. But, you know, what's going on? One reason for this may be their forward guidance. They're anticipating a loss next quarter, as well as anticipating a decrease in revenue. They reported 180 million. The estimate's 171 million. They're also estimated as a loss. This is negative, a negative EPS. This is the period ending at the end of the year. So we're talking about this month still, October, November, and December. They just reported the 3 months prior to that, to October, November, and December. I think if Bitcoin follows its cycle like it has in every cycle, and we see Bitcoin go higher than it is at the beginning of this quarter, the beginning of October, then they will report an unrealized gain on Bitcoin. Not only that, but Bitcoin's average price. It was reported in their investor relations that they're mining Bitcoin at like a 46, 47K price. Of course, that isn't all of their expenses, but you know, these companies are definitely mining Bitcoin profitably, as you've seen in their last earnings report here recently. But you know, I would anticipate that they're gonna see a surprise profit and beat these numbers because of Bitcoin's cycle. If Bitcoin can end the cycle strong, in this year strong, Riot's going to report a fantastic quarter, and this may be a fantastic buying opportunity. One thing also to consider is maybe the market was kind of expecting a good quarter from Riot, expecting a surprise beat, because it has been doing pretty good recently. While it has been far from the greatest Bitcoin miner this cycle, you know, like when you look at your performance this cycle compared to Bitcoin, I mean, at the best it did like a 6x. Bitcoin for the most part throughout this whole cycle has outperformed Riot. There are some Bitcoin miners that have outperformed Bitcoin. Riot is not one of them. Right now, Riot from the crypto winter lows is only a 5x, which is kind of depressing, kind of disappointing, to be honest. What's interesting though is it has had a nice run going all the way back to April when this was, you know, $6. It's had right here from $6 to where it's pulled back. It's still up 200% just from April, which is pretty fantastic. While a lot of the Bitcoin miners starting running in April, you know, Riot has definitely been doing pretty good, at least as of recently. You know, 2x from April is pretty impressive. But like I said, you know, from a cycle standpoint, Riot has been a pretty weak performer, to be honest. But in recent time, it has had a pretty good run. Maybe it was due to cool down regardless. Of course, there could be other negatives that are in the earnings call that I didn't necessarily hear. But one thing you're going to want to watch, first off, this is an important level that we bounced off of, this 18 something. This was a previous resistance point. You can see that it was a resistance and we came down. We basically got a bounce on it. We may come down and retest it, this roughly, you know, $19 area, right around where the 50 MA is on the daily here. Keep an eye for a bounce around this area. I think if we bounce here, we are going to see a retest of this high. This is actually the cycle high from Riot that it recently put through. Some Bitcoin miners aren't at their cycle highs. CleanSpark, for instance, their cycle high is like $25 from back in 2024. They're near there, but they haven't broken it yet. Riot has broke its cycle high from back here in late 2023 of roughly 2082. They broke that. It's seen a new cycle high relatively recently, while some haven't, some have. But, you know, maybe that's part of it, a little bit of profit taking because we got rejected here at this level here, this resistance. Once we can break this, I think we're coming for $28. Which is the next zone of resistance, basically. But keep an eye on previous prices and previous, you know, points of resistance and support, because the market does tend to utilize those on future run-ups and pullbacks. Like we are trying to utilize this as a support here, this previous resistance as a support. Seeing this resistance continue to hold up as a support would be good to see. If we see it break, we're likely coming down to previous resistance levels, possibly 16 area right here, possibly this previous support being tested at 1650. If you like Riot, I think it is a buying opportunity here. You might want to be patient and confirm that we can actually bounce here at this 19, at this area near this 50 MA. If we can see a confirmed bounce, I do think we're going to come for those highs, that 2350 area. If we can break that, we're going for roughly 29 area. But I do anticipate a surprise beat on their upcoming earnings. At least if we trust in Bitcoin cycle, we should see that. Of course, things can always play out differently, but that would be my expectation. Do I see another, you know, triple or 5x for the Bitcoin miners? I don't think so. Some Bitcoin miners have massively outperformed Bitcoin. Some haven't, such as Riot. Do I think Riot has the potential to outperform Bitcoin? I do think so. And like I've said, I think Bitcoin's going to do roughly a 10x from the crypto winter lows of 15K. Or a run to 150K. That was my reasoning. We're going to see a 10x for Bitcoin to end the cycle. And then Michael Saylor jumps in and copycats me and says Bitcoin's going to go to 150K. Jokes aside, if Bitcoin does a 10x from 150K, what does Riot need from its crypto winter low to outperform that? As long as Riot can reach 36 and above, it could potentially outperform Bitcoin. That is quite a climb from here. We're talking about nearly doubling from here. If Bitcoin can do another roughly 50%, which would bring it to right around 150K, I think there's potential that Riot can see a double. The Bitcoin miners towards the end of the cycle can outperform Bitcoin 2-1. But what do you guys think? Do you think that's too optimistic? Do you think Riot's relatively poor performance versus Bitcoin is an indicator that it isn't at all going to outperform this cycle? There's a lot of HPC and AI news. I want to listen to their earnings call and really dig into their investor relations and dig into their official press release and all that stuff before I talk too much about that. But what did you guys get out of their earnings call? Are you more bullish on Riot after their earnings? Are you less bullish? Are you bearish now? Do you think Riot's going to post a profitable quarter in their next earnings? Thanks as always for watching, guys. Have a happy Halloween, have a good weekend, and I will see you next time.